Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. It's a baffling phenomenon, the prevalence of power-hungry homeowner association presidents in South Africa. It seems as though every neighborhood has its fair share of crazed individuals who revel in the authority bestowed upon them. But let me rewind a bit and provide some context. I've never been a fan of homeowners associations. To me, their purpose is dubious at best. My neighborhood was perfectly fine without one, and yet, fate had decided that we needed one. Our homeowner association was led by a corrupt individual, a despicable creature who seemed more interested in lining his pockets than improving the community. Resolutely, I chose not to join the homeowner association. Their president, however, took my decision as a personal affront, and embarked on a relentless campaign to coerce me into submission. Whenever I stepped outside, he conveniently materialized to inundate me with persuasive speeches extolling the virtues of the homeowner association. His persistent attempts to wear me down were futile. Letters, phone calls, and unwelcome visits bombarded me ceaselessly. It was apparent that this man had a master plan to hound me until I yielded and joined the homeowner association. But I was not about to squander my hard-earned money, enabling him to indulge his avarice. I would rather spend it on frivolous indulgences than surrender it to the man who had become a perpetual thorn in my side. Realizing that his previous tactics had failed, the president resolved to take more extreme measures. And so, one fateful evening, as I sat down to dinner, the doorbell rang persistently. Annoyed but sensing the possibility of an emergency, I answered the door, only to come face to face with none other than the homeowner association president himself, brandishing a menacing shotgun. Fear coursed through my veins as he barked orders, demanding that I vacate my own property. I complied, retreating to the street, feeling helpless and violated. It was then that he laid down his ultimatum: join the homeowner association or face his wrath. The audacity of his demand was chilling, but I dared not question his resolve. I drove away, vowing to return sooner than he expected. Seeking solace and support, I sought refuge with a friend who, understanding the gravity of the situation, reluctantly provided me with a firearm. While I knew it was unorthodox and risky, I couldn't bear the thought of being defenseless. I harbored no intention of causing harm, merely a desire to protect myself if the need arose. With no other viable options and my legal rights on my side, I returned to reclaim my home. Much to my dismay, it appeared that the homeowner association president had been surveilling my property. No sooner had I stepped foot inside than he materialized, his rage palpable. Aiming his shotgun at my face, he threatened me once again. My hand trembled as I tightened my grip on the handgun, the line between life and death growing thin. In that moment of desperation, I fired a shot, aiming for his leg. It was a desperate plea to deter him, a plea that I'd hoped would only graze him or strike the ground. Yet fate had other plans. He screamed in agony, and the sound of sirens pierced the air as the police and ambulance arrived swiftly. With his own actions sealed his fate. Unable to concoct a believable story of innocence, he confessed to his despicable motives. Admitting to threatening me due to my non-compliance with the homeowner association, he claimed he never intended to harm me. But his confession did little to erase the terror he had inflicted upon me. While I did face some legal repercussions for my possession of an unauthorized firearm, the punishment was minimal, a mere warning and a nominal fine. The incident left me with an aversion to firearms, witnessing firsthand the catastrophic consequences they can cause. Meanwhile, the corrupt homeowner association president faced more severe consequences. An investigation into his finances revealed the extent of his embezzlement, a crime that rightfully warranted punishment. He was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds, ensuring their redirection toward genuinely benefiting the community. Furthermore, he was promptly removed from his position of authority, and the entire episode served as a cautionary tale, casting doubt upon the integrity of homeowner associations. In a twist of poetic justice, a few weeks later, a mighty storm ravaged the neighborhood, reducing the former president's house to ruins. It felt as though a divine hand had intervened, demonstrating that wrongdoing ultimately begets retribution. Inspired by this fortuitous turn of events, we decided to utilize the funds recovered from the president's misdeeds to create a community garden on what was once his property. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So a friend and I moved into this newly renovated apartment in Brooklyn. It's nice enough, but just about every one of the 14 units has some sort of weird problem. One unit had the hot and cold water mixed up, flush a few times and get a heated toilet. One unit had none of the outlets grounded, and one unit had gaps around the windows. The problem in our unit was a leak in the air conditioner lines. The leak was probably at the roof, but we ended up with no AC. We called them, and it took a month to get someone. He refilled the lines, and a week later the problem came back. We spent the summer getting the system topped up every week. At the end of the summer, they decided that our repairs and all of the neighbors were getting too expensive. So they sent us bills. Our bill was in the tens of thousands of dollars. Recharging that system weekly must have been expensive. They also started trying to charge every unit for any infraction, like $100 for every unit for a single scrap of paper found in a hall. The tenants all got together to have a little meeting. It turns out that they never got a certificate of occupancy for the building. The city had it on the books as a furniture warehouse. So collectively, we all just stopped paying them. Rent, fines, fees, nothing. We retained a lawyer and just lived there. The company tried to get us out by cutting lighting and other services. We contacted the lawyer, the company would get fined, and we'd get our lights back. They tried to change the main lock once, but we let the locksmith know what was going on, so he stopped. They didn't try it a second time. The first floor of the building was an off-track betting parlor. They were particularly noisy and obnoxious, so one resident called the health department over a moldy loaf of bread we found in the basement. One of my best memories was watching a bunch of guys in hazmat suits clear out the betting parlor so they could run tests. Eventually, they tried to get the certificates, but to do that, they needed to do inspections with the drywall removed. They tried to do it while we lived there, and the lawyer fought it for not being in a livable state. Finally, they realized they needed us out. If they got the certificate of occupancy while we were still there, we'd owe back rent. They took us to court to get evictions. The lawyer got everything pushed back as far as he could, but finally we went to city court. The lawyer pointed out that they were trying to evict 14 units, but you can't evict more than 10 at a time. The court ejected the case. I don't think their lawyer got a single word in, so now we have a county court date for an ejection instead of an eviction. Again, the lawyer pushed it out as much as he could, but eventually we went. The court agreed to eject us all, but saw the evidence of lighting and lock tampering. The court asked our lawyer what would be a reasonable time frame. The lawyer asked for 4 months. The judge gave us 6. Everyone stayed until the last month. At the end of it all, we got to live in a newly renovated apartment in a trendy area of Brooklyn for free for a little over a year. The next one is a petty revenge story. After 5 years of marriage and endless false promises, I finally get my personal revenge. My ex-husband, 32, and I, 33, got married in 2017 after 1 year of a long-distance relationship between the US and Germany. We sealed the deal, got married in the US, and he wanted me to live with him in the good old US of A because he didn't want to learn another language. To make things easier, he moved in with me in Germany for a job I helped him get, so we would have time to finalize my plans for emigration and immigration. Now my ex didn't even get started gathering all the required documents for himself to be my sponsor. Said and done, I had all the documents well sorted out, canceled all my contracts, sold my belongings, sent large parts of my things to the US, and said goodbye to my lovely home, friends, and family. Little did I know my ex-husband did not do a single bit of research or even do his part for my immigration process, and I wasn't able to set foot on the plane that would bring me to my new home. Long story short, he left for the US without me, and I was homeless with a suitcase and 2 cats. He continued to lead me on with promises to come and get me. Meanwhile, he started a polyamorous affair. Later, he got involved with a 21-year-old young lady. I lived with my parents for a few months to get back on my feet, find a new apartment, and a new source of income. Now, I never went to German officials to get our marriage recognized in Germany, mostly because I didn't think it was necessary since we planned to live together in the US. But my laziness should prove to be useful later. Since he was with his new girlfriend, 21, I broke off the relationship. In the US, we still count as married, and focused on myself, regaining my independence, and rebuilding my life in my home country. I fell in love with an acquaintance, 31, I've known for 13 years, and we soon found that we have very similar goals in life. and the same ideals and wishes for a monogamous life. Meanwhile, I've been in contact with my ex to finally get him to start the divorce process in the US. Since the marriage was closed in the US, only a US citizen is able to petition for divorce at the district court. I didn't want my name to be further affiliated with him, and I also didn't see the reason why he should further profit from tax benefits. I made it clear that I didn't want this anymore and wanted to move on. Finally, he got the process started and forgot one single thing. I am not an American citizen. So everything that applies in the US when it comes to paperwork doesn't apply to me in Germany. It means serving me via email? Nope. Wanting me to sign something electronically? Nope. Not possible. All they would have to do is send me the notarized, signed, and translated paperwork via physical mail. But they don't, so I get email after email with pleas to get me to sign the US divorce papers electronically. With every email his lawyer sends me, his pay ramps up. Don't get me wrong, I certainly told the lawyer what he has to do in order to get me to sign a legally significant piece of paper, but I guess he doesn't know international laws. So at this point, my ex still sits on all of my belongings I asked him to give back, and since he doesn't do that, I'll keep collecting spam mails from his lawyer. That's my personal revenge for leading me on, using my hopeless romantic heart, and leaving me alone when things got tough. I don't count as married in Germany, and am currently expecting a little baby boy with my partner, and we are building a life together without false promises. The next one is an entitled people story. My aunt was one of two kids my grandparents had. My mother was the polar opposite of my aunt. She worked from the age of 12 in my grandfather's shop, never asked for anything, and eventually managed to start her own business. My aunt never held down a job until the age of 26, was constantly stealing from her parents, and was constantly in trouble. Despite this, my aunt was spoiled by my grandmother, and so were her kids. She had 3 kids from 3 different men, and her first husband was not one of them, if you know what I mean. It didn't matter what my aunt or her kids did, my grandmother would always jump to their defense. She never had time for my mom and her kids, unless it was to get something from us. The only reason my mom would visit her was because she loved my grandfather. My grandfather passed away in 2004, and a few months after, my nan decided to write up a new will. My mother and my aunt were both present for it when she signed it, so they knew what was in it. It made it so that when she passed away, her home would be sold and the money split 25% each to my mom and aunt, and the remaining 50% would go evenly to the grandkids. At the time, the home was worth more than £500,000, so it would be a nice little inheritance, but nothing life-changing. In 2010, my mom died after an accident and did not have a current will in place. As she no longer had her business and was renting a house, she didn't have anything of much monetary value. The only thing she was concerned about was what would be done at her funeral should she have passed away. But she had told me everything she wanted. The music, the flowers, the coffin color, and even what people were to wear at the funeral. She wanted people to wear bright, warm colors. So when she passed, my aunt and nan took over all the arrangements and tried to undo all the things I had told them. The songs were going to be songs I knew Mom didn't like. The flowers were all the wrong colors, and they picked a hideous coffin. With the help of my siblings, we were able to change a few of the things back to what they were supposed to be. But the coffin couldn't be changed for some reason, and my nan refused to let people come dressed as clowns, so it was all black. It was frustrating. After the funeral, my nan had her will changed. My siblings and I were told by our aunt that she didn't have any involvement with the writing of the will, and our nan told us that she changed it so that Mom's share would go to her kids instead. All good, we thought. After Mom passed away, my nan just stopped talking about my mom. At first, we thought it was because she was still recovering from losing her daughter, but even 5 years after Mom passed, she still wouldn't talk about her. Even if you brought up a story about Mom, Nan would very obviously try to change the subject, usually about how hard my aunt and her crappy kids had it. And if you went to talk to her about your own problems, she would somehow bring it back to my aunt. I had suffered a mental breakdown after my mom's death, so you can imagine how much it hurt to hear, well, X has had it so much worse. In 2016, my nan passed away. She had written down what she wanted to be done for her funeral, and it was basically all the same thing she had picked out for my mom's funeral, even the music to be played. I don't know why she tried to have a dress rehearsal funeral using my mom as the stand-in, but it was obvious that's what she was trying to do. So after a couple of months, our siblings and I were waiting to hear about the will reading, and my aunt kept telling me, "Oh, it'll be another month before we can do the reading." I didn't mind. I wasn't fussed about the money, to be honest. But my oldest brother was hoping to use the money to pay for a honeymoon for him and his then fiancée, and my younger brother was about to start uni, so it would be a hell of a help. Eventually, my dad bumped into the solicitor my grandmother had used to deal with her will and asked what was happening. The solicitor let slip that the will had already been read and that it left everything to my aunt. When my dad questioned this, the solicitor told him that my aunt had been present when the will was written, despite promising that she had nothing to do with it. When confronted, my aunt initially tried to deny it, but eventually admitted to lying to all of us. She showed us the will, and it confirmed what we already knew. The house and all its contents were now my aunt's. This included my grandfather's war medals. He fought in the Second World War. When I told her that he had promised them to me before he died, she said, "Well, unless you have it in writing, you will have nothing in this house." Anyway, I already gave them to Clive. My heart sank. Clive, not his real name obviously, was her eldest son and the dictionary definition of a duck-up. He'd been in and out of prison for stealing and dealing drugs. I knew that the moment that prick got his hands on my grandfather's medals, they would have been sold off. We looked into taking her to court over the will, but everyone we spoke to said that we probably wouldn't get anything out of it. She immediately put the house up for sale at close to £750,000. She had pissed off too many people in our town, so she was going to sell the house and move closer to her daughter, who lives in a big city. An offer was made on the house, and she put down a deposit on a house near the big city. And I thought that was that. Here's where karma comes into play. The people who wanted my Nan's house had a survey done on the house to see if there were issues, and oh boy, were there. Turns out that the land the house was built on was too soft for the type of house it was, and it was sinking. It had sunk about 2 cm in the 40-plus years my Nan and Granddad had lived there, but the sinking was accelerating to 1 cm per year. This meant that within the next 3 years, the house would need some serious work or be knocked down. The new value of the house? £60,000. The buyers immediately pulled out, having not even put down a deposit. She couldn't buy her new house, but still had to pay the deposit on it. And while this was happening, she let Clive move in with her into her house that she rented from the council. He wasn't allowed to live in any of the council houses because he had trashed every single one he'd ever been given. Someone reported this, and she was kicked out of her home. She was forced to move into my Nan's old home as she couldn't live anywhere else. So there she is, living in a crumbling house with her shithead son and her partner. She was stuck there for 2 years. Every time I saw her, she would try to start talking to me, and I would just ignore her and walk off. One time, as I was walking away, she screamed, "Your mother deserved to die for having a retard like you," in the middle of a busy street. Someone reported her to the police, and she had an official warning from them and was ridiculed on Facebook. Every time I saw her after that, she looked more and more miserable. Eventually, she sold the house for something like £85,000 and moved in with her daughter in the big city. I lost contact with her and her kids after this. I thought karma had been issued. Oh, but karma still wasn't done with her. I bumped into one of her former friends, and she told me what happened after she left our town. She moved into her daughter's home, let's call her Sue, but they only had a 3-bedroom house and 3 kids. My aunt and her partner had to live in the smallest room in the house, while my aunt looked for a job and a home to rent. Even with £85,000, she couldn't afford a home anywhere. After about a month, my aunt's partner ran off after emptying her account. She was left stranded in Sue's house, not contributing anything because all the money she makes goes into bingo. Eventually, Sue and my aunt got into a screaming match, and my aunt said something along the lines of, "I should have aborted you." Sue immediately kicked her out of her house. So again, there's my aunt, in a city where she knows nobody, no money, no home, and the last bridge she had is a smoldering wreck. The last anyone has heard, she was living in a caravan in the roughest part of the city, and she can no longer work because she's suffering from early onset arthritis and can no longer move her hands. I know I shouldn't find joy in something like this happening to another person, but it does bring me some peace as to what happened. The next one is an entitled parent's story. I went out on a Friday for a few hours with some friends, just some shopping and catching up. I hadn't seen some of them for the last 2 years due to COVID when we used to hang out almost every week. And I am leaving the country in a few weeks, so we took this opportunity to catch up and have a farewell party. I was out from late afternoon until about 9 or 10 p.m. when I got home. I took out my keys to unlock the gate, but they wouldn't fit. I tried to turn the key around, yes, like a USB, thinking it might fit the other way, but it still wouldn't go in. I called my mother, but she didn't pick up. I called my grandmother, who lives with me, but she was also out with her friends and wouldn't be home anytime soon. At this point, I was pissed. My mother had already burned a couple of my work pants the day before because I refused to wear a dress for work. My line of work requires me to move around a lot, so a dress or office skirt was not suitable for my environment. I shook the gate, but no one was home, so I picked the lock. After a few tries, I managed to open the metal gate. Luckily, the wooden door behind it was not locked. The neighbors did call the police, and of course I had to show them that I actually lived there and it was my legal address. I took some essentials and went to stay at my friend's house for the night because I couldn't lock the door back, and I didn't feel safe in the house without a locked door. The next day, my grandmother and I were invited to a pre-wedding event. It was kind of a meeting with the elders and an engagement party ceremony at a cafe. My mother only sent me the address and time for it. It was perfectly normal for my grandmother to be invited to these things via my mother. My grandmother doesn't know how to use a phone other than basic functions like calling. We showed up on time at the cafe and were escorted to a booth-type seat at the corner of the cafe. The booth already had a lady, mid-40s, 50s, and a guy. I assumed she was the mother and the guy was her son. The moment we sat down, the lady took out a calendar and notepads filled with lists of flower arrangements, color schemes, menus, dresses, hairstyles, etc. She introduced her son, who is 28 by the way, and told me what he does for a living, what he studies, and where. She thanked me for agreeing to marry him. I looked at her, then at her son, and then at the wedding planners and notes. It finally registered that this was for my wedding. My grandmother was pissed, to say the least. I apologized to the lady and said there must be some kind of misunderstanding between us, because I came to attend someone's engagement party, not plan my own. I added that I was only 20 this year. My grandmother then rudely asked why she thought that I would be marrying her son. The lady replied that her mother contacted her and said her daughter was looking for a partner and husband to settle down, so she, referring to me, could move out. My grandmother calmly said to the lady that she had been lied to, and that I was not going to be getting married anytime soon. She said her son seems nice, and hopes he finds someone who likes him to marry in the future, but it was not going to be me. We got up and left. When we got home, I found my things stuffed in a black plastic bag beside the door. My grandmother opened the door and told me to bring my stuff in. The moment I stepped through the door, my mother yelled that she put so much effort into finding a guy who would take a girl like me to marry, and that I should be grateful she didn't just marry me off to an older dude. She said I should be happy she found someone my age. She told me I embarrassed her because the mother called her and told her what she did was not okay, and she didn't even ask or inform me properly. My grandmother started to shout at my mother in Cantonese, which resulted in them being in a heated argument for almost 30 minutes, and my grandmother kicked my mother out. Of course, my mother moaned about and cried about it before leaving. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.